guillotine, an instrument of terror or a nod towards humanity? That's the question we're diving into today. Was this infamous execution device a tool of brutal oppression, or was it actually designed as a more humane form of justice? You might think you know the answer, but history has a way of surprising us. From the strange truths about its invention, its gruesome reputation during the French Revolution, and through to the shocking conveyor belt usage of the Nazi regime, we'll uncover the facts that might just change the way you see this terrifying killing machine. Stay with me, as by the end of this video you may just have acquired a very different opinion on the guillotine's legacy. So without further ado, let's get to it. So before we delve into the guillotine itself, to start with, let's look at one of the most popular methods of execution: beheading. This, of course, is the act of separating one's head from one's body, and has served as a method of execution throughout recorded history. Its use spans across continents and cultures, making its presence in ancient civilizations, medieval kingdoms, and even persisting in some parts of the world today. The enduring popularity of beheading as a form of capital punishment stems from its perceived efficiency and reliability. When carried out with precision, it results in a swift and, supposedly, relatively painless death. This characteristic made it a preferred method in times when executions were often public spectacles, aiming to deter potential criminals and assert the power of the ruling authority. In the Middle Ages, the role of the executioner held a unique position. These individuals were often skilled professionals who travelled from place to place, offering their services to local authorities. Their expertise lay in ensuring a clean and swift beheading, minimising the suffering of the condemned. The executioner's reputation and skill were vital, as botched executions could lead to public disapproval and even accusations of incompetence or malice. While the basic principle of beheading remained consistent, its implementation varied across different cultures and time periods. Some societies favoured the use of axes while others preferred swords. The choice of weapon often carried symbolic weight, reflecting the status of the condemned or the nature of their crime. Although beheading has largely faded from use in modern judicial systems, it has not entirely disappeared. In some countries, it remains a legally sanctioned method of execution, often reserved for heinous crimes. Additionally, non-state actors have sometimes employed beheadings as a tool of seeking to instill fear and assert their authority. Despite its gruesome nature, beheading continues to hold a certain fascination in popular culture. It appears in historical dramas, works of fiction, and even video games, often serving as a dramatic and shocking plot device. This enduring interest likely stems from the primal nature of the act, its association with power and punishment, and its undeniable shock value. The guillotine, a name synonymous with the French Revolution, carries a dramatic and often misunderstood history. While it's forever linked to images of revolutionary fervour and public executions, its origins are far more nuanced, and its story involves a curious mix of humanitarian ideals, practical considerations, and a touch of irony. Contrary to popular belief, the guillotine wasn't invented during the French Revolution. Its conceptual roots trace back to Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine, a French physician and a member of the National Assembly. Now here's a twist. Dr. Guillotine wasn't a bloodthirsty revolutionary. In fact, he was quite the opposite. He opposed the death penalty. However, recognising its continued use, he sought to make executions less cruel. At the time, methods like the breaking wheel, drawing and quartering, and burning at the stake were common. These methods, of course, had the result of inflicting prolonged and agonising suffering. Dr. Guillotine believed that decapitation, if done correctly, offered a more swift and, relatively speaking, humane death. Now, Dr. Guillotine wasn't a hands-on inventor. He proposed his ideas to the National Assembly in 1789, arguing that all executions should be carried out by decapitation using a mechanical device. This proposal wasn't about revolutionary zeal. It was about equality and minimising suffering. The Assembly, intrigued by the idea, commissioned the design and construction of such a machine. The actual prototype was designed by Antoine Louis, a surgeon and secretary of the Academy of Surgery, and built by Tobias Schmidt, a German harpsichord maker. Initially, the machine was called the Louisette after Antoine Louis, but sadly for Dr. Guillotine, the name didn't stick. Interestingly, King Louis XVI found himself playing a small unwitting role in the guillotine's development. He was reportedly interested in the mechanics of the machine and, during its design phase, suggested that a straight-angled blade would be more efficient than a curved one. This suggestion was adopted, further refining the guillotine's design. Ironically, the guillotine, intended as a tool for more humane executions, became the chilling symbol of the horror that emanated during the French Revolution. While Dr. Guillotine advocated for its use to minimise suffering, it ultimately became the instrument of mass executions, indiscriminately used against perceived enemies of the said revolution. The swiftness and efficiency that made it seem more humane also made it a tool for rapid and widespread executions, drastically increasing the scale of capital punishment. The guillotine, forever linked with the dramatic and often bloody chapters of the French Revolution, didn't burst onto the scene with the storming of the Bastille. Its initial use was surprisingly mundane, almost anticlimactic. It wasn't used to topple the aristocracy at first, but rather for a common criminal. The guillotine's story is one of ironic twists and turns, going from a symbol of supposed humane execution to an instrument of terror. The guillotine's first official use occurred on April the 25th, 1792 in Paris's Place de Grève. The unfortunate individual to test the new device was Nicolas Jacques Pelletier, a convicted highway robber and murderer. The execution was a public event, though likely not the spectacle it would later become. One can almost imagine the crowd murmuring with a mix of curiosity and perhaps a touch of disappointment. After all, public executions were a form of entertainment. All this newfangled machine seemed to make the whole affair rather quick. No drawn-out suffering, no dramatic pleas for mercy, just a swift slice and, well, that was that. Little did anyone know this seemingly unremarkable event was the opening act of a historical drama that would unfold with unprecedented intensity. The guillotine's use remained relatively limited in its early days. However, as the French Revolution intensified and the reign of terror descended upon France, the guillotine's role drastically changed. It went from being a tool for supposedly humane executions to the very symbol of the reign of terror itself. The once obscure device became synonymous with swift, efficient and, tragically, indiscriminate justice. The year 1793 marked a turning point. King Louis XVI, who, as we have heard earlier, had taken an interest in the device, even suggesting improvements to the guillotine's design, sadly for him, became yet another statistic for the machine. I wonder how he felt looking at the straight blade for the last time. His execution, along with that of his wife, Marie Antoinette, sent shockwaves across Europe and solidified the guillotine's place in history. These executions weren't just about removing the monarchy. They were powerful symbolic acts, demonstrating the radical shift in power and the ruthlessness of the revolution. The Reign of Terror, which spanned the years 1793 to 1794, saw the guillotine working overtime. Under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre, the Committee of Public Safety sought to purge France of its perceived enemies. Thousands of people, from aristocrats to commoners, were accused of treason or counter-revolutionary activities and swiftly condemned to death. The guillotine became the instrument of this purge, and the public executions became a chilling spectacle. The tumbrils, carts carrying the condemned, became a common sight in Paris, rumbling through the streets on their way to the Place de la Révolution, now of course the Place de la Concorde, where the guillotine stood ready. The Reign of Terror, however, couldn't last. Eventually, even Robespierre, the architect of these horrors, fell victim to the very machine he had used to consolidate his power, and received a taste of his very own medicine. In a final, ironic twist, Robespierre himself was guillotined in 1794, along with 21 of his supporters. The swiftness of his execution served as a stark reminder of the indiscriminate nature of the guillotine and the transitory nature of power during the Revolution. While the guillotine is most famously associated with the French Revolution, its use wasn't confined to France. Like a grim souvenir, the guillotine travelled across Europe, adopted by various countries as their method of execution. It wasn't just a French thing, it became a European thing, although thankfully not a lasting thing. Several European nations, impressed by the guillotine's efficiency, or perhaps its ability to create a dramatic flair to the proceedings, decided to incorporate it into their own legal systems. It became a popular method of capital punishment in places like Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, and even some parts of Scandinavia. Each country put its own little spin on the design. However, at the end of the day, it was still a bloody big blade that chopped off heads. So no matter what tweaks each region applied to the machine, the core concept remained the same. The guillotine became a symbol of modern justice, or at least expeditious justice, which I guess is a polite way of saying it killed people extremely quickly. Perhaps the guillotine's most chilling chapter outside of France unfolded during the Nazi regime in Germany. The Nazis embraced the guillotine with frightening enthusiasm, using it on a massive scale to eliminate their perceived enemies. It wasn't just used for common criminals. The guillotine became a tool of political terror, silencing dissent and crushing resistance. An estimated 16,500 people met their end under the guillotine's blade during this dark period. This included members of the White Rose Resistance, like the incredibly brave siblings Hans and Sophie Scholl, who dared to stand up against the Nazi regime. Their executions and countless others highlight the guillotine's use as an instrument of oppression and the tragic loss of life it inflicted. The final couple of years of World War II saw a horrifying surge in the guillotine's use in Nazi Germany. As the regime crumbled, it lashed out with increased brutality, executing an estimated 10,000 people in a desperate attempt to maintain control. This period represents the guillotine's most intense and widespread use, marking a tragic climax in its long and bloody history. Even after the war, the guillotine story wasn't quite over. In West Germany it was used until 1949. East Germany, however, took a more secretive approach. The Stasi, the infamous East German secret police, continued to use the guillotine in secret until 1966. This clandestine use underscores the chilling nature of the East German regime and its willingness to employ brutal methods even after the world had supposedly moved on. The guillotine's journey beyond France serves as a stark reminder of how easily tools of violence can be adopted and adapted for different purposes. While initially intended as a more humane method of execution, it became a symbol of terror and oppression, used by regimes across Europe to silence dissent and enforce their power. Its story is a dark chapter in European history, a reminder of the fragility of human rights and the enduring struggle against tyranny. Guillotine, that infamous symbol of the French Revolution, didn't simply vanish after the Reign of Terror. It stuck around a while, like the man who came to dinner. While its most dramatic period was during the Revolution, the guillotine continued to be France's chosen method of capital punishment for a surprisingly long time. Its story in the 20th century is a curious mix of dwindling public interest, behind-the-scenes executions and eventual abolition. Now picture this, it's June the 17th, 1939 in Paris. The crowd is buzzing with anticipation. This is it, the last public execution in France. Not that this was known at the time though. Eugène Weidmann, a convicted murderer, is about to meet Madame la Guillotine. However, the event turned into a bit of a fiasco. The crowd was unruly, to put it mildly. They were rowdy, pushing and shoving to get a better view, and to make matters worse, the relatively new phenomenon of media coverage, especially filming and photography, turned the whole thing into a total circus. Just imagine the same thing happening now with social media. Doesn't bear thinking about. After Eugène Weidmann was dispatched, the authorities, perhaps realising this wasn't exactly the dignified image they wanted to project, decided enough was enough. Public executions were officially banned. It seems the guillotine's public appearances had led to just too much excitement for the French public. So the guillotine wasn't retired, it just went into hiding. Instead of being a public spectacle, the executions became private affairs, carried out within the walls of prisons. This wasn't necessarily a move towards greater humanity, it was more about controlling the narrative and avoiding the potential for public disorder. The guillotine, now firmly in the closet, continued its grim work, quietly dispatching those condemned to death. It was like a macabre secret, lurking in the shadows of the French justice system. Even behind closed doors, the guillotine's days were numbered. The tide of public opinion was turning against capital punishment, and France, like many other countries, was moving towards abolition. However, the guillotine had one last performance up its sleeve, and this occurred as late as on September the 10th, 1977. Hamida Diandoubi had the dubious honour of being the very last person to be executed by guillotine in France. He had been convicted of both torture and murder. It was a quiet end to a long and bloody history. Finally, in 1981, France officially abolished the death penalty. The guillotine, after nearly 2 centuries of service, if you can call it that, was finally retired. It wasn't a sudden dramatic moment, it was more of a quiet fading away. The guillotine, once a symbol of revolutionary justice and later an instrument of state-sanctioned killing, simply ceased to be. Its story serves as a chilling reminder of the evolution of justice systems and the long journey towards what is hopefully a more humane world. During the guillotine's use, one topic of conversation gained more and more traction, and that was what happened to the head immediately after decapitation. The guillotine has long captured the morbid fascination of the public. While intended to be a humane method of execution, the question of consciousness after decapitation has haunted discussions surrounding its use. Could the severed head retain awareness, even for a fleeting moment? The idea is both chilling and scientifically intriguing, sparking debate that continues to this day. The central point of contention revolves around the persistence of brain activity after the head is separated from the body. It's a common misconception that death is instantaneous and absolute upon decapitation. However, scientific evidence, though limited and often anecdotal, suggests otherwise. Studies using EEG on animals have indicated that brain activity can continue for a period after decapitation. This activity, while likely disorganised and rapidly diminishing, raises the unsettling possibility of some level of awareness. The key factor here is the continued supply of oxygenated blood to the brain, albeit briefly. While the body is no longer providing this supply, the brain itself still contains a reserve. This residual oxygen allows for continued neuronal activity, although it's a rapidly dwindling resource. Scientists believe this period of activity, potentially lasting up to 90 seconds in some cases, could theoretically support a rudimentary form of consciousness, though it would likely be drastically different from normal waking consciousness. Understandably, this is a difficult area to study ethically. We can't exactly go around decapitating people for research purposes. Much of the evidence comes from historical accounts, often anecdotal and prone to exaggeration. There are stories, for example, of guillotined heads appearing to grimace, blink, or even attempt to speak. However, these accounts are highly unreliable. Post-mortem muscle spasms triggered by the remaining oxygen in the brain can easily be misinterpreted as purposeful movements. The head might also react to external stimuli like light and sound without any actual awareness on the part of the deceased. One famous, though likely embellished, anecdote involves a French criminal named Henri Languille, who was guillotined in 1905. Accounts claim that immediately after his head was severed, a doctor called out his name. Languille's eyes supposedly opened and he looked directly at the doctor before closing them again. While this story and others like it are captivating, they lack the rigour of scientific observation. The scientific debate continues, fuelled by both curiosity and ethical considerations. While we may never definitively know what, if anything, a decapitated head experiences, the ongoing discussion highlights the complex relationship between brain activity, consciousness and death itself. It's a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring mysteries that still surround the human brain. So there we are. The greatest irony of the guillotine story lies in the fate of its namesake. While Dr. Guillotine opposed the death penalty and sought to make executions less cruel, the machine he championed was ultimately used not just to execute King Louis XVI himself, but thousands of others. Dr. Guillotine was reportedly horrified by the way his invention was used during the horrors of the Revolution. He publicly expressed his regret and was even said to have been haunted by the association of his name with such a brutal instrument. He died a natural death, but the shadow of the guillotine forever followed him. Well, thanks very much for watching yet another episode from History's Life Stories. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. Take care and I'll see you next time.